You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? Good morning. It is Sunday, week 2 of the NFL season. And with every Sunday at 11 a.m., you, of course, get Locked On NFL Sunday. Myself, Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, joined, as always, by my good friend Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL, host of Locked On Broncos. Cody, how are you, my friend?
Hey, you know what? Week 2. It's crazy how in the offseason we were doing some of these offseason shows, and we're like, we can't wait for the season to get here. And now that the season has gotten here, I feel like, it's been so entertaining. I haven't really seen any games so far that have just bored me to death. It's been fun. And Thursday night's matchup was great. I think if you're just a football fan in general, we were treated to a nice treat with the season opener with Tampa Bay Dallas, and obviously last week with the Washington football team and obviously the New York Giants. It's fun, man. And we get a full slate of games here today. What more could you ask for?
Absolutely. Here we are, week 2. No bye weeks just yet, which means nothing but football action. Early morning slot, afternoon slot, all jam-packed. But yes, that Thursday night game was an absolute just barn burner, honestly. A ton of fun, particularly the way that it all came to an end. We'll talk about that. We're also going to be joined by Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears. Should the Chicago Bears start Justin Fields sooner rather than later? And that's going to be right before our guys Alex Clancy and Bo Brock of Locked On Cardinals come through to talk about the Arizona Cardinals, who look like they can be legitimate NFC contenders in the toughest division in the NFL, in my opinion, the NFC West. And of course, we'll be joined every week by Vinny Iyer of Locked On Fantasy Football to get your fantasy football advice. So if you have any questions, don't forget to drop them in the chat or hit us up on Twitter so we can get your questions into Vinny when he joins us at maybe about 20 in the hour later on in the hour here, or 20 till, let me say it that way. So Cody, we want to start off with that Thursday night football game as we get started with today's episode of Locked On NFL Sunday, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. What were some of your takeaways from this very, very exciting NFC East matchup?
Well, I tell you what, a little bit of a barn burner between the New York Giants, the Washington football team. I had thought going into this game, Ross, that Chase Young, Montez Sweat, I thought they were going to have a field day. Now, I thought New York did a better job against them than they did the week prior against Von Miller. However, the interior of that offensive lineman for the Giants, it took a shot, obviously losing Gates to a fractured leg. That was brutal, man. So, obviously, thoughts and well wishes go out to him. But, Taylor Heineke putting on a show. Terry McLaurin, Scary Terry.
Terry. Terrifying Terrence.
I love that matchup right there. And I loved watching Terry McLaurin. I loved watching Taylor Heineke. Now, a little bit of late game drama, obviously, is Taylor Heineke. They were just trying to milk the clock. He threw a pass, and James Bradbury did a phenomenal job undercutting it. It was almost kind of like a pick rub route, one of those design plays there. Undercuts it, intercepts it. And from that moment, I saw the moment he threw it, he regretted it. But, man, can we talk about that touchdown throw to Ricky Seals-Jones?
I was waiting for you to say it.
But that was a beautiful one.
Obviously,
the Giants come out on top.
Yeah, 13.7% completion probability according to Next Gen stats from the NFL on that touchdown pass to Ricky Seals-Jones. Incredible. And Taylor Heineke was also the first Washington quarterback with 300-plus pass yards and 2+ passing touchdowns since Chase Keenum did it back in 2019. So Taylor Heineke, not a bad start after the Washington football team losing Ryan Fitzpatrick early on in the Week 1 matchup. But are you pushing the panic button on the New York Giants at this time already? Now 0-2 to start the season, and we know 0-2 in the 16-game season usually means your chances of getting the playoffs are pretty grim.
I wouldn't say so just yet, right? And the reason I say that, if you go back to that game, it's ridiculous, though. Joe Judge, a former special teams coordinator, and you have these penalties, these mistakes on special teams. Obviously, Hopkins misses the game-winning field goal at first. Offsides penalty, moves it up 5, nails the game winner. That's just it. I'd say the encouraging thing, if you're a New York Giants fan or a supporter, you look at the fact that they scored 29 points. That's great. But you also go back, a drop touchdown pass by Darius Slayton, a touchdown run by Daniel Jones called back due to a holding penalty. They left so much more out there on the field against a pretty good Washington football defense, in my opinion. I still think they're trying to get things going there, trying to get in rhythm. But outside, I don't feel like you should panic just yet if you're the New York Giants. Saquon obviously is not where he needs to be just yet. It's going to take some time for him to get back to where he was. So I wouldn't panic just yet. However, 2 weeks from now, if they're 0-4, yes, panic away.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. A leading rusher for the New York Giants, not Saquon Barkley, but instead Daniel Jones with 95 rushing yards in that game. That game plan isn't entirely there yet. I think you wait to see how it's all going to unfold. And speaking of waiting to see how it's all going to unfold, we're going to get to our first guest here on today's episode. We've got our good friend, Lauren Cox of the Locked On Bears podcast to talk to us about the Chicago Bears and, of course, everyone's favorite topic this offseason, Justin Fields. Lauren, how are you, buddy?
Hey, appreciate you having me on, but I think your first guess was just Cody's cat there climbing over his chair.
I almost spun into that. But I was like, I'm gonna just move forward. So thank you for acknowledging the cat in the background. I'm sure that the cat very much appreciates it, right, Cody?
Yes.
Always loves an introduction.
I was going to say that was probably going to be the biggest question today is the cat going to interrupt the live broadcast, or is Justin Fields going to start for the Chicago Bears at any point, anytime soon? Obviously, Lauren, let's open up. We didn't get to catch you last week for the pregame. Obviously, you're at a wedding, man. I hope that went well. But for the most part, I think right now, and I got a few friends that are Chicago Bears fans, and I floated this question out to them. You look at the game last week, I think there was a telling sign when Andy Dalton would have led any type of scoring drive for the Bears. Obviously there was a little bit of celebration, but when Justin Fields did it, you saw how his teammates reacted. That, to me, in my opinion, tells me all I need to know about how the Chicago Bears, at least the players, view Justin Fields. When might we see him start? Because I feel like if you're Matt Nagy, you can't wait too much longer if the pressure keeps rising.
Yeah, the pressure has been building really from the moment he was drafted, but in the preseason as well. We saw the fan base start to boo Andy Dalton a little bit in the preseason, and even Justin Fields had come out and said, "Hey guys, I love the support, but Andy's a good person. He's our starting quarterback. Cheer him when he's on the field. You can cheer me when I'm on the field too, but let's make sure that we're cheering him." But even after the week one game, we hear from wide receivers talking about, how great it was to have Justin Fields out and the energy that he brought. The Bears offensive coordinator this week said, he's ready. We feel like Justin Fields is ready to go. And basically kind of whenever Matt Nagy decides to make that switch, he'll be ready whenever we end up making that switch. So even members of the coaching staff are kind of getting there. So it's just a matter of, I guess, they want to give Andy Dalton a little bit more run up. The one game, week one against Aaron Donald, maybe not always the most fair way to evaluate a quarterback and say, well, one time and you're out. I mean, give him a couple strikes, I guess, to see what he can do now against his former team this week, the Cincinnati Bengals. But it doesn't feel like Dalton is going to be anything different than we've seen from his career up to this point in Cincinnati and Dallas last year. So then were we waiting for him to show us something new? Are we waiting for him to change as a quarterback all of a sudden? I mean, it just feels like it's delaying the inevitable. And if the Bears keep losing, more of that pressure is going to come on Matt Nagy to make that change. And it feels like we're only maybe a couple of weeks away unless Dalton really turns things around today against Cincinnati.
Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears at Cox Sports 1 on Twitter. So, Lauren, it sounds like you're pretty much in the camp that as soon as, from your perspective, if you were pulling the trigger here, you would have Justin Fields out on the field relatively soon, is what I'm understanding?
Yeah, I would have started in week one, I think. I mean, all
nice.
Things, they had some they kind of promised Andy Dalton when they signed him. They said, you're going to be our starting quarterback. And they didn't want to go back on that word because, there's some integrity in terms of free agent negotiations that if you start this reputation of promising players things and then not delivering, then maybe, as a regime, it becomes harder to negotiate with guys and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's some politics, I guess, if you call it, to that. But at the same time, you have to do what's best for your team to win football games, first and foremost. And it seems pretty clearly that Justin Fields has the more talent, and maybe there'll be mistakes along the way. We've seen other rookie quarterbacks have struggles, but overall, the Bears are having trouble moving the ball downfield. Justin Fields is going to be a lot better in that regard. Dalton not going to be as mobile, and Justin Fields already scoring a rushing touchdown, right? We're seeing what he can give this Bears offense, and so far you've lost one football game feeling like you have a better quarterback. How many losses are they going to take feeling like there's still a better option to improve your team that they're choosing not to use?
I think a lot depends on that division. I mean, Minnesota, I don't have too much confidence in the Minnesota Vikings in that division. Obviously, you also take a look at Green Bay coming off of a loss. You have the Detroit Lions who have lost. So everybody in that division right now is 0 for 1. So I guess that's a little bit of a cushion there. But the offensive line, Jason Peters expected to make his debut here today. Now, obviously, I think the tackle position is also probably the next position for the Chicago Bears that has been highly brought into question because of the injuries and because of the play so far. Going against a team like Cincinnati, do you feel like this could be a game maybe where they can maybe get into rhythm a little bit, or are you a little bit skeptical about the offensive line in general?
So I think last week against the Rams, we were expecting this offensive line to be a disaster against Aaron Donald because most offensive lines end up looking kind of disastrous against Aaron Donald. And all things considered, I wouldn't say that they had a great game, but they did better than we expected given the opponent that they were going to face. They got pressure on Dalton, and they were able to sack him a few times and disrupt a few plays, but it wasn't as though the Bears had to throw their whole game plan out because they could never get enough time in the pocket. And they were able to run the ball. David Montgomery, I think, had over 5 yards a carry. It was like 16 carries for 106 or something yards. So they were able to do a lot of things they wanted to do with the offensive line up front. So in theory, if they can avoid more injuries, which they weren't able to do last week, Peters had left last week's game with an injury. His backup came in and got hurt. So they went to a third left tackle last week, who was originally their fourth left tackle after Tevin Jenkins had gotten hurt. They now have two of their top four offensive tackles on injured reserve, and they're just trying to keep some kind of lineup up there. There's some real concern and some fear as to that moving forward. And to give the Bengals credit, the interior of their defensive line played really, really well last week against the Vikings. They gave Kirk Cousins some trouble up the middle, some just too much strength there for the interior of that line. So there's still going to be some challenge there, but I'm feeling better this week about the line going into it than I did last week because they did, I think, seem to show some progress in that regard. It's just up to Dalton and company to really take that opportunity and move the ball downfield and string together more successful offense than we've seen so far.
Now, all right, you're feeling a little bit better about the offensive line there. Coach Nagy, very successful in September, 9-3, losing only openers during that time. What about the Chicago Bears in this matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals? Where do they have the advantage going into today's game?
Well, I think first and foremost, you look at these Bears wide receivers going up against these Bengals cornerbacks. It's not as though like the Bengals are bad at cornerback per se, but the Bears have been kind of waiting for things to develop and get open a little bit more downfield. When you have Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney, and then a couple of speed guys they brought in, Marquise Goodwin for the 49ers and Damiere Byrd from the Patriots. Not that it's a top flight NFL wide receiving core, but all of those guys can work vertically downfield. There's a lot of speed there, and the Bears haven't necessarily been able to get that speed going, or at least been able to get the ball to them when they go vertically downfield. So I'm looking for these Bears wide receivers to really start winning these matchups a little bit more. And Andy Dalton maybe have just a little bit more time to throw it downfield and open up a little bit more of that. I mean, I think it's going to be some tough sledding over the middle for David Montgomery trying to run on this interior of that Bengals offensive line. So I think defensive line, excuse me. So I think trying to get the passing game going and having that speed on the outside should be where the Bears offense can find an advantage. But clearly they couldn't last week, and it's what everyone's going to be looking for this time around.
Obviously something to take a look at with the Locked On Justin Fields podcast there, Lauren. I love that branding there. One thing, too, I'll bring up defensively. There's been a lot of questions, I think, this offseason, specifically regarding Khalil Mack. Now, obviously, we found out just about a few weeks ago there was some report that the Raiders had interest maybe in trading for Khalil Mack here once again. Now, is the story, too, because the defensive side of the ball, I feel like, is a very interesting point. We've seen the NFL try to replicate the Vic Fangio style of defense. How are things progressing along for this Chicago defense? I know they've been dealing with some injuries too in the secondary, but a lot from Khalil Mack. There's been a lot of questions as to, will we see him perform the way he was again, the last couple of years? I think that's a big question. Are you concerned about that at all?
Slightly, but not over the top, I guess is kind of where I'm at. He's one of those guys that, everyone is going to look at the sack numbers, and we should expect high sack numbers from Khalil Mack. But the last couple of years in Chicago, it's really been a lot more of the pressures and the hits that, it's such a focus from opposing offenses to throw 2 or 3 blockers on him. And, he just hasn't had as many of the finishing plays at quarterbacks this year. And I think it's in part because the Bears have lost more in the secondary. And so quarterbacks haven't had to hold on to the ball as long because they've been able to find more open receivers downfield. And so, we haven't seen like the big game-changing plays from Khalil Mack as much over the last season in the game now. So that's where slight concern, like he hasn't taken over in the way that he used to take over, but he's still consistently winning pass rushes up front and getting some pressure on the quarterback. The Bears have just been waiting for like somebody else to step up and really be able to capitalize on all the attention Khalil Mack is taking. And I think if they could have a little bit more of that balance, and sometimes Akeem Hicks hasn't been able to quite do it, Robert Quinn hasn't been able to quite do it. The interior guys haven't been able to quite be everything they need them to be around Khalil Mack. And so that's why overall the pass rush just hasn't been as good as it needs to be. And they really need it to be better when you've got a bunch of first and second year cornerbacks on the back end. And last week, there are 2 veteran safeties, Eddie Jackson and Tashawn Gibson. We both have been in the league for 6+ seasons. Busted coverages on both of them, gave up 2 of the easiest touchdowns the Rams are going to have all season. And when you give a playoff team like the Rams 2 free, easy touchdowns on busted, wide open, deep touchdown passes, it's going to be hard to win those games. So if the safeties that you thought you could rely on can just kind of get back to what you're supposed to be able to respect out of them, and let the young cornerbacks be the one that makes the mistakes, and not the safeties on the back end. It's just like those little things at each level that are kind of collided to cause issues last week, and you would think they should be able to clean that up as the season goes on. Maybe it's a weird week 1 thing, but there's some real concern about this Bears defense to start that needs to be cleared up sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Lauren, we appreciate you very much for coming through. One more thing before we get you out of here, we got to get your prediction for this game. Can the Chicago Bears get to 1-1 with Andy Dalton under center on Sunday?
On paper, this is one I think Bears fans circled to say this should be an easy win on paper, but Bengals beat the Vikings in overtime last week, and you feel a little bit iffy about this Bears defense. I'm going to go with a tight Bears win because I think we're supposed to see a bit more Justin Fields this week than we did last week. And so, 24-21, maybe 21-17. I don't think it's going to be a big shootout, but I think like a 20-17 is how I'll put a number on it.
Love it. Love it. Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears at Cox Sports 1 on Twitter. Have a fantastic Sunday, Lauren. We'll be seeing you again soon. Thanks again for coming through.
Hey, thanks for having me on anytime.
Always a pleasure,
Obviously, in the chat, Keith McHale, a guy I played football with, big Chicago Bears fan too. Also, he knows a lot about defense. He's a defensive coordinator, high school football. This is a conversation that we see him have on Twitter all the time. Really, I think the concern right now is really more so with the Bears defense and also just Andy Dalton. I think a lot of it is if Justin Fields can come in, obviously with his mobility and just the energy that he provides. I mean, that could be really all you need to give the other units a boost of confidence or energy or momentum. There's things that Justin Fields can do that Andy Dalton simply can't, that it gives him a little bit more of an edge, being able to extend plays outside the pocket. And obviously, if you have any concerns with your offensive line play, that does help. It helps negate that a little bit versus a guy who really stands in the pocket, can't really be mobile on the outside and can't extend plays. So I think that there's an added benefit there. I'm intrigued to see if one of these teams in the NFC North gets their first victory here today. It could be Chicago. Obviously, for the Cincinnati Bengals, they lost T. Higgins last week, who was carted off the field, but Jamar Chase looked good in his first action there, but they're going to need a lot more, Cincinnati is. So I imagine this is probably going to be one of those fun, entertaining games that we see. But, we'll see if Chicago can come out on top.
I chuckled a little bit when you mentioned Jamar Chase's name because I'm remembering Joe Burrow sitting down and saying, I thought he couldn't catch footballs. I thought he was having trouble with that. Before we get to our friends, Bo Brock and Alex Clancy over at the Locked On Cardinals podcast, I want to take a look at some of the picks that we have, Cody. So we're starting off with yours. These are from our friends over at Tally Site. So you've got the Bears beating the Bengals. I actually have the Bengals over the Bears, but I do think that it's going to be close. And I also got my Giants pick wrong on Thursday too. So what do I know? But when it comes down to the next game I want to talk about real quick, Buffalo at Miami for this one. You've got the Bills. I've got the Bills. What is it for you in that game that you're going to be watching?
Well, I think that we were all disappointed by the performance last week of the Buffalo Bills in that second half. I mean, it looked like they were in control against Pittsburgh, and then they just laid an egg. They couldn't get an offensive rhythm going in that second half. That was kind of disturbing to me. And obviously, Gabe Davis, he's questionable for this matchup here. But for me, I look at it as the Miami Dolphins. They've struggled so much against Josh Allen. I just don't see them turning around, especially if they perform the way that they did last week against the New England Patriots. I mean, I have concerns about their viability there. So I'm going to go with Buffalo in this matchup just because right now they look good. And I think that they're hungry and they're angry about last week. At least I would hope they are. With a very, very disappointing home loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who couldn't run the ball, by the way. You have to find a way to rebound this week, and I think Buffalo is going to try to make a statement win against a division rival.
Absolutely. Buffalo 5-0 over the last 5 against the Miami Dolphins, even though the Miami Dolphins have never been starving for points in those matchups. And also the Dolphins themselves, much like a team I'm very familiar with, hasn't started 2-0 in a while. They haven't started 2-0 since 2018. Not as bad as a team that I'm familiar with, but we'll get to them later on, because first I want to get to some, okay, listen. We knew that the NFC West was going to be an absolute battle throughout this season. You and I talked about it. We talked over the offseason about the most challenging divisions in the NFL, and we both kind of agreed that, hey, NFC West is definitely one of those places that could send 3 playoff teams into the postseason. And one of the teams that has the ability to get there is the Arizona Cardinals. And look, I got roasted a little bit when I picked the Arizona Cardinals over the Tennessee Titans. All right,
you did.
I got a little bit of heat. Okay, and now I ain't never afraid of no heat. All right, I like being in the kitchen. Okay, I don't mind being in the kitchen. I'm from New Orleans. I'm from the South. I'll be cooking up the gumbo. It's fine. So I'm never afraid of any heat. But when I say that the Arizona Cardinals are NFC contenders, I'm going to need y'all to hear me. And to help you hear me, we're bringing our friends over today, Alex Plante, Bo Brock, Locked On Cardinals. My guys, how are y'all doing?
What's up, man?
Love it, Ross. I love it. Keep bringing it.
I'm saying I got the heat, and it's fine. I understand. People sleep. I get it. But the Arizona Cardinals came out and handled business against the Tennessee Titans last week. How'd y'all feel watching that game?
I mean, it was a perfect game. It was in a vacuum what you draw up for things to happen. Chandler Jones coming out after missing all of last year, 5 sacks, 2 strip sacks. I mean, and Kyler Murray was doing Kyler Murray things. DeAndre Hopkins broke his ankles on the first touchdown catch like he does. I mean, it was perfect. It was Xanadu Shangri-La to watch, especially against now a perennial playoff team. You know? I mean, it was magic.
I feel like you did that reference just for me, and I appreciate it.
You're welcome. He might have. You know, obviously going back to the whole the defensive side of the ball. Now, Ross last week, he picked the Arizona Cardinals. I picked Tennessee because I still thought, you know, hey, with the additions of Julio Jones, A.J. Brown obviously still coming back, and then obviously Derrick Henry, you know, it's kind of like a pick your poison. I feel like we saw a little bit of a regression here from the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, a new offensive coordinator and Downing, obviously not Arthur Smith. And I kind of posed the question last week that the way that these guys call plays will be different. However, what we did see, and I love watching Alex and Bo on Twitter during games because, you know, it's fun. It's entertaining. It's like throwing 2 cats in a bathtub with these 2 guys here. But the thing I saw from Kyler Murray, just electric plays, obviously, you know, rushing for touchdowns, throwing it. He had a jump shot throw for a touchdown to Christian Kirk. Perfect. I mean, we have two wide receivers that have 2 touchdown catches each. It is great. But what surprises me the most, I was more impressed with that defensive secondary than I initially thought I would have been. I thought Byron Murphy did a phenomenal job against Julio Jones. What were your takeaways on the secondary? Because I know that was really kind of one of the bigger questions coming into the season for the Cardinals.
Yeah, 1 for 1. You know, they're 1 game in, and they proved that they belong. And it was Byron Murphy taking that step in his 3rd season, and he looked like a CB1. He looks like he could potentially be a household name soon. Just really, he balled out and he held those guys at bay. A.J. Brown, he did have a touchdown in that contest, but it really didn't mean too much. Julio Jones, not a spectacular performance. So Marco Wilson, a 4th-round pick, played 91% of the snaps and was fantastic. Knocked the ball out of hands a couple times from Julio Jones. So this secondary, it was helped out a lot by this front 7, though. I mean, Ryan Tannehill had no time to throw the ball. I mean, he was under pressure all game long. And it was, I was thinking it's kind of like a heavyweight fighter where they just have that knockout ability. They do. Like they took Derrick Henry out of the game. Snap 1. It was Chandler Jones in the backfield taken out for a TFL. And then you have J.J. Watt. You've got Marcus Golden. You've got a guy, Zach Allen, who's kind of under the radar. And they were just playing meat at the quarterback. And that makes it a lot easier to cover. And if these guys are going to raise their game, they're going to have the opportunity to do so with a front 7 that 1 game in, guys, was special.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bo, you mentioned the name that I wanted to ask about, Chandler Jones, 5 sacks in this game. Alex, let me go to you. Is this something that you expect to see from Chandler Jones throughout the entire season? I mean, the guy's not going to get 5 sacks every game, but certainly he looked like he was just ready to kind of blow off the charts here in week 1.
Pay him now. I'm done. Pay him now. No, so here's the thing is, you know, we've seen this from Chandler Jones. He looked really fast. Yeah. He looked really fast, and he was going around, not Bo, not Cody Roark. He was going around, Taylor Lewan. He was going around an all-pro left tackle like he was me, and the fact that he has that first step still that, we didn't know. Bo and I talked a lot all offseason, like, should we trade him for a second-round pick? Would it be beneficial at this point with him going to the last year of his deal? I mean, we'll see what happens today against another somewhat porous offensive line in the same kind of setup offensively. But, I mean, he's on pace for how many sacks, Bo? 187? Whatever.
He had 3 of those sacks in the first quarter.
That was it.
Right,
so he was on pace for 200-something sacks after the first quarter. But I think we'll see a shade of this, especially because J.J. Watt, taking up some attention on the other side regardless. But if he's the old J.J. Watt, he's still wearing 99 on an opposing team's uniform. And then you have the guys in the back, Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins, that could be blitz threats as well, which needs to keep offensive lines honest. So he might see more one-on-one blocking than he's seen in a while.
Can I? Is this a safe space with the Broncos host to talk about Vance Joseph?
Are we in the nest?
You can go ahead. Yeah, open forum.
Can we sing the praises of BJ? Because Vance Joseph did a great job in getting some one-on-one matchups for Chandler Jones last week, and I don't expect anything less this week. If they want to go one-on-one with Chandler Jones and Rashad Hill, who's going to probably start at left tackle for the Minnesota Vikings, I think Mike Zimmer, those odds for him to be the first head coach fired should just skyrocket. Because that would be a fireable offense to just let a guy like Rashad Hill go up against Chandler Jones one-on-one. Are they going to chip with a tight end? Are they going to bring in a 6th offensive lineman? I don't know. But they've got to do something because the Arizona Cardinals, that's how they're going to try to eat on defense, I would think, each and every week, especially as Alex said. This is a very similar matchup as it was in week 1.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. And I will say this too: defensive coordinator Vance Joseph better than head coach Vance Joseph, and I think it allows him to play to his strength. And I think that with the additions of Zaven Collins, I was watching that game again. I did a rewatch, and I was just really impressed with both he and Isaiah Simmons. And Isaiah Simmons looked like Clemson Isaiah Simmons last week against the Tennessee Titans. So I think as you can continue to utilize both of these guys more, and then you have, if Chandler Jones, J.J. Watt, those guys stay healthy, I mean, I tell you have a great recipe for success inside the NFC West, which right now every team is undefeated there. So as we've talked about here on the show, that is a gauntlet of a division there. Now, my other question I have for you here, gentlemen, I think really predicates a lot on the offensive side of the ball. Now, what we saw with Kyler Murray, what we saw with the offense last week was a great step in the right direction. Now, we've all been on here saying, and I think that you guys, when I listen to your podcasts on YouTube and on your favorite podcasting platforms, free and available everywhere, Locked On Cardinals, one of the things I've noticed is that Cliff Kingsbury still kind of a talking point there. How do you feel after week 1, right? What do you want to see from Cliff going from week 1 here to week 2?
Take it, Bo. I'm on my 2-day. I have 2 days left of my moratorium for no crap talking about Cliff Kingsbury.
I think
I'll put myself in timeout.
Yeah, it was. Alex said we'll see if he continues to have to change.
It's gonna be tough today.
His stance on Cliff Kingsbury, because Cliff Kingsbury in year 3, unlike Kyler Murray, there's still more unknowns as far as can he stay at the head coaching level? Does he belong? And week 1, he showed that he did. And he showed last year early that he could be a play caller at this level and then fell off a cliff. What's going to be key for him is consistency. One thing that he incorporated was some pre-snap motion. He got a little creative with the play calling. And I think he's finally got the personnel to do that. You add some speedsters like Rondale Moore in the 2nd-round pick out of Purdue, a guy that had over 60 yards receiving last week, but 50 of that was with the ball in his hands. And then you've got a guy like Christian Kirk, who's maybe in a more comfortable spot where he's going to be the guy, he's going to play inside instead of outside. He had 2 touchdowns in that game. And then, of course, DeAndre Hopkins. They've got a very, fast receiving core outside of A.J. Green, and I think that fits his style a little bit more. And then Chase Edmonds, he's been a Chase Edmonds fan for a long time at RB1, and then James Conner looks spry. It's a better matchup. And people are like, well, no Larry Fitzgerald, but did Larry Fitzgerald do them a favor? Kind of like, if you love something, set it free and let them kind of be who they need to be to take that next step. And I think that's what it is. We got to see it a second consecutive week, though, because Cliff Kingsbury hasn't done a good job where he has one good week and then the next week defenses catch up. So can he make those adjustments and continue to have success? That remains to be seen. Today's a great opportunity.
And one little button on that point. If he doesn't put Rondo Moore and Christian Kirk on Patrick Peterson's side all game, I don't know what we're doing here. It should be a cheat code. Well, because he doesn't because they don't switch sides on in Minnesota's defense. So Patrick Peterson, look what happened with Jamar Chase last week. And this is all joking aside with Patrick Peterson. Speed is not his thing anymore. And you have the two most speedy receivers. You put them on the same side, his head's going to fall off. So
I think Patrick Peterson's the only guy that can cover anybody in that defensive secondary. Go at Bashaud Breeland, for God's sake. You talk about Jamar Chase's play. They didn't even throw to P2's side. Jamar Chase absolutely just made toast of Bashaud Breeland. That's what I want. I want actually the 6 points, not like the viral video.
Our good friend Breeland Paul Elliott here agrees with you guys. Get Jamar Chase, get Jamar Chase out of there.
Breeland has had a tough go this offseason. I just remember watching him in joint training camp practices against the Broncos. Jerry Jeudy ate his lunch. And also, everybody has seemed to be eating his lunch so far. Don't know if it's a Zimmer thing, but, man, I do think when we get to this matchup, gents, I mean, your prediction for how this may go. We'll go Alex, we'll go Bo. We'll see how close you guys are.
Yeah, we both nailed the score exactly the same, 31-17 Cardinals. The under is going to be the interesting part here because, 50.5, both teams can put up points. But, I mean, I think 31-17, the Cardinals smack them in the mouth. It's pretty much the same exact offensive setup as Tennessee. Kirk probably has a little bit higher floor than Tannehill. Tannehill obviously has an astronomically higher ceiling, but two great wide receivers, one all-world running back. Let's see if the Cardinals can rinse and repeat from last week, 31-17 Cardinals.
Yeah, it makes me sick to my stomach, but yeah, we have the exact same score prediction, and it was 17. And yeah, Kirk was better against the pressure. He faced not the same amount of pressure as Ryan Tannehill in week 1, and was a lot better. Can that narrow the margin? I think a little bit, but yeah, 31-17 seems about right. But do they go back to the early, like how they started 2019 and just feed Dalvin Cook? That could be an interesting way to keep things close. They're going to have to get creative because they have a lot of guys out on the defensive side of the football. They're going to have to take some of the air out of the football on the offensive side potentially.
I think we're all in agreement here. No Pat Pete revenge game at all going down. We've got the Arizona Cardinals across the board for this, which can only mean one thing, that the Arizona Cardinals will indeed win. You guys, we appreciate you so much for coming through. Alex Clancy, you can follow on Twitter at Clancy's Corner, and Bo Brock, you can follow on Twitter at, as he likes to say, Bob Rack. Very easy to remember that way. Appreciate you guys. Make sure you check out the Locked On Cardinals podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, free on all platforms. Guys, we appreciate you coming through. Always a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. Real quick, one last thing. I know Vinny Iyer's up next. Bo is terrible at fantasy football. Bo, you should stick around for Locked On Fantasy Football. You need all the help you can get. All of it.
Vinny's going to be here to bring it to you. That is for certain. Guys, we appreciate you.
Thanks, guys.
Man, I tell you what, if you ever want to be entertained, just watch those two guys on their YouTube channel. Like when you hear them on the audio podcast, you can hear it, but when you actually watch them and just see them go at each other, they dunk on each other all the time. It's like I said, those two guys together are like throwing cats in a bathtub, my friend. I love those guys. They crack me up. But man, like I said, I think the Arizona Cardinals, I think the key that I want to see, Ross, is kind of what they're talking about offensively. Can Cliff Kingsbury in the offense maintain that, right? You can do it 1 week, but can you build on it? Can you stack consistency? That I think is going to be a very important factor, not only just for Cliff Kingsbury, but for Kyler Murray and this offense. I mean, what we saw last week with Christian Kirk, DeAndre Hopkins was great. Rondale Moore is fun to watch, but even AJ Green had a couple of big possession catches. So I kind of like him in that role. They are loaded on the offensive side of the ball. They have to keep exploding.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be a very fun matchup, and this Arizona Cardinals team is going to continue to be a very, very fun team to watch as we go through. Here in just a moment, everybody, we're going to be joined by Vinny Iyer of Locked On Fantasy Football. You have any fantasy football questions as you're watching along, go ahead and drop them in the chat wherever you're watching, or you can hit us up on Twitter at Ross Jacksonola or with Cody at Cody Roark NFL. That way we can get your questions here. So if you have a starter sit, you have a this or that, like this player or that player, let us know, and we'll get those answers for you. But no matter what, we'll be talking about must starts. We'll be talking about players that you might not want in your lineup today, and of course any late injury updates that we have coming through. In the meanwhile, Cody, let's get to some more of our picks for today's matchups. Let's start off with a couple of teams that we know very well: Denver Broncos, Jacksonville Jaguars, and we'll talk about New Orleans at Carolina. Right now, for the Denver at Jaguars game, you've got Denver winning. What are your thoughts on this matchup?
I think a lot of it, the Broncos are riding off of a 1-0 start to the season. Look, and under Vic Fangio, the last 2 years, we talked about it last week. He was 0 for 7 in September. Now he's got a win under his belt. The Broncos defensively, they look pretty good for the most part. Now, obviously, when you look at Ronald Darby, he's out for 3 weeks on IR. So Patrick Surtain will get the start today for the Broncos on the outside against a very talented wide receiver core. I mean, Marvin Jones, DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault.
Yeah.
I don't think you can undersell those guys there. However, the Jacksonville Jaguars, their offense, going back from the preseason all the way through now, has not looked good. Trevor Lawrence, he does look the part, but he's coming off of a 3-interception performance. Bradley Chubb is active for the Broncos here today. He missed last week, so opposite of Von Miller, you're going to have those two guys there, not to mention that healthy defense for the most part. So I'm looking at that matchup. They're going to try to pressure Trevor Lawrence, but you have to play discipline. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, I said that my keys to victory for the Broncos this week, Ross, is going to be for the Broncos on offense to pound the rock out of 12 and 13 personnel. You have Melvin Gordon coming off of a big performance, over 100 yards rushing, and then Javonte Williams, a healthy dose of those guys against the Jaguars defense that gave up 165 rush yards last week to the Houston Texans, Philip Lindsay, Mark Ingram. I think that the Broncos need to find a way to establish that. Not to mention, guess what, Ross? The weather conditions. It is rainy in Jacksonville today, so run the ball.
Run the ball. Keep it on the ground. You and I are in agreement there. We both got the Denver Broncos winning that one. I want to see all the success I can find from Teddy Bridgewater. I'm going to just be completely honest.
I was
but
surprised
I do think
by him last week.
He was a surprise last week for certain, for sure. He absolutely was. And I think a pleasant one, of course. But, man, he just came out and looked like a different Teddy Bridgewater in those phenomenal traditional orange and blue and white jerseys. I mean, he looked fantastic.
Well, my thing is too, and I don't want this to sound like a hot take, but I posed the question this week because I think we have to look at it from every angle. There's a lot of people that when Teddy Bridgewater was signed to the Broncos, they said he is who he is. He's never going to change. But here's the deal, though. I go back to his time in New Orleans. He was very efficient. You know this from obviously covering him. He led the Saints to a 5-0 record when Drew Brees was out, and he had a strong defense behind him. Now, for me, what if Teddy Bridgewater coming to the Denver Broncos propels him the way that Ryan Tannehill found a resurgence in Tennessee? I'm just saying that I don't feel like we should throw that out as a possibility here for Denver while everyone's still eyeing Aaron Rodgers and the Broncos fan base. Look at, I get it's 1 week, right? I'm not saying it right now, but I'm saying what if Teddy Bridgewater's tenure now in Denver is sort of similar to Ryan Tannehill's resurgence in Tennessee. Keep an eye on that as a possibility. But Ross, let me ask you here about the New Orleans Saints, obviously coming off a very impressive win last week, 38-3, a score prediction, and sounds very familiar to what happened last year.
Yeah,
and could the Saints be setting the Green Bay Packers up here for a Super Bowl run? I don't know, Ross, but I was very impressed by Jameis Winston, who was super efficient. Obviously not a lot of passing yards, but he didn't need it because guess what? When you come in with 5 touchdown passes, that's fantastic. Not to mention the completion percentage. They just dominated from start to finish.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be sure to ask Vinny Iyer about Jameis Winston and some fantasy value here in just a moment once we get to him. But look, here are a couple of ways to look at Jameis Winston's day. Yes, 5 touchdowns to 0 interceptions. Not the Jameis that they love to talk about in that situation, but also a talk about efficiency. A touchdown every 29.6 yards thrown, in that he only threw for 148, and a touchdown every 2.9 passes completed. He only had to complete 14 passes to get to 5 touchdowns, made good on short fields. And so you have to look at the defense for the New Orleans Saints when it comes down to that, creating those short fields. And then, of course, special teams are helping to flip the field as well. So the big thing that I would look at here going into today's game up against the Carolina Panthers, both Marshawn Lattimore and their star slot corner, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, are going to be inactive for this game. Not only that, a couple of players at the defensive line, Tano Passanio, who came in place of an injured Marcus Davenport, who is on injured reserve now, they're going to miss these games. The Saints are also going to be missing 2 linebackers, actually 3 linebackers in this one, including starter Quan Alexander. So they're going to have to go to some younger options. Rookie Peyton Turner is going to come in this game and then get some reps on the defensive line after being inactive the first week of the season. You're also going to see Jalen Holmes, who they elevated from the practice squad, former Minnesota Viking. Then in the second level, Zach Bond is going to get his first real shot at that will linebacker position next to Demario Davis in place of Quan Alexander in regular season action. He's athletic, but he's a transition from pass rusher when he was drafted from Wisconsin last last year. And Paulson Adebo, the rookie third-round selection, is going to be one of your guys at cornerback opening up this game. He played a fantastic game last week, had an interception, allowed only a 2.1 passer rating when targeted. Now, can they come in and step up? The New Orleans Saints have done very well in the draft here as of late, and they found immediate impact. They're going to need it today. Are they going to be able to walk away with this victory against an offense in Carolina that's not perfect, because it is led by Sam Darnold, who was 0-6 between 10 and 19 yards, hit on the big 57-yard pass to his former teammate, now again teammate Robbie Anderson. Can the New Orleans Saints eliminate the deep pass so that they keep everything short and, of course, limit the ground game for Christian McCaffrey? Check this out. Carolina Panthers, since Christian McCaffrey's been in the NFL, 2-12 when he catches 9 or more passes. That is a huge stat, because if you can keep his production off the ground and through the air, you're doing well as a defense. So can the New Orleans Saints defense continue to put this offense in advantageous situations while, by the way, missing 7 of the 15 on-field coaches the New Orleans Saints usually have due to advanced and enhanced protocols for the New Orleans Saints dealing with a COVID-19 outbreak amongst the coaches. Big game, because it's division. I know it's early, but it's still a divisional game. But a ton of things. You talked about keys to victory in this one. My key to victory for the New Orleans Saints, managing adversity. They've done it better than a lot of teams in the NFL. Can they do it again?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, too. And obviously, going against Christian McCaffrey, when you're missing some of your linebackers, your starting defensive line, that's a tough task. So you have to hope that those other guys can plug and play. But that's what you prepare for. I'm just excited to see a little bit more Paulson Adebo.
Oh, let's get it.
Talked about a lot so far this offseason, my friend. And obviously, a great addition here. He and Marshawn Lattimore together will be very, very fun to watch. And obviously, with the C.J. Gardner-Johnson coming back, hopefully soon. I don't know the extent of the injury, but that would be a very nice secondary there from the cornerback position. But
absolutely.
Yeah, Ross had obviously a big key, obviously divisional matchup here today between the Saints and the Panthers. You can catch all that action. Not to mention, you can get the post-game recap courtesy Ross Jackson on YouTube and on your favorite podcasting provider, free and available everywhere.
Absolutely. And speaking of free and available everywhere, so is all of your fantasy football needs with our Locked On Fantasy Football podcast and our amazing host from Sporting News, Vinny Iyer. Let's go ahead and bring him in for some fantasy football talk. Vinny at Vinny Iyer on Twitter. How are you, buddy?
Doing well, Ross. Cody, good to see you guys again. I hope you guys did well in week 1, and hopefully we'll be ready to dominate week 2 as well.
Hey, 3-1 in my 4 leagues, and a good portion of it was from your advice last week. I did start my Minnesota Vikings, and it helped me out a little bit, so I appreciate that for sure. So let's start off with sort of the big, what's the most helpful advice you've got going in here when it comes to week 2, some must starts for you for this weekend?
Yeah, we do have to pay attention to some injuries now. They're starting to happen and affect fantasy football. So we have Josh Jacobs is going to miss the game against the Steelers for the Raiders. So the twist is that Peyton Barber looks like he's going to be the early down back starter. I don't think that's that big of a twist, but clearly this coaching staff not all in on Kenyon Drake as more than just a change of pace receiving back. I don't love the matchup. So if you can go elsewhere from the Raiders backfield against the Steelers, I think that Steelers defense at home is going to be pretty tough. I think one of the best matchups of the week is that Steelers offense for everybody involved. I think this is a good week to use Ben Roethlisberger. Chase Claypool is going to make a big play and get in the end zone. Deontay Johnson will be solid. And Najee Harris, I know, is very disappointing out of the gate to see your rookie running back do that when you drafted him so high. But this is the Najee Harris week. He's going to get going against the Raiders. I don't like anything in the Raiders defense. Short week. They played well into overtime against the Ravens. They're going to be gassed for this. Steelers are going to come out and have a nice offensive rebound here.
I like some of those selections too, and I'd be, may sound like a homer on this one, but I'm going to ask you a little bit, right? Obviously, a big injury last week to Broncos wide receiver Jerry Jeudy, who had 6 catches and 72 yards before he went down with a high ankle sprain. He's going to be out 6 to 8 weeks here. Is there anybody on the Broncos, whether it be Tim Patrick or KJ Hamler, that you feel like would be a confident play for anybody that's out there? Because I know we had one viewer in the comment section asking about Jamar Chase, Cortland Sutton, or Jarvis Landry for one of their spots here this morning.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Tim Patrick having that role. I think he's a little bit more what they want to help Teddy Bridgewater there in replacing Jerry Jeudy. I like KJ Hamler a lot, but to me, he's a guy you mix around the field, try to create matchups in the open field, whether it's inside or outside. So more, I don't want to call him a gadget player, but I think that's how he's kind of used in complementing the rest of their weapons there. So I look at Cortland Sutton and Teddy Bridgewater. This was the concern when Teddy Bridgewater was the quarterback, is that Drew Lock is more of a high-risk, high-reward type quarterback. He's going to throw the ball downfield, take chances to Cortland Sutton, even when he's covered. And sometimes that led to some big mistakes from Drew Lock. But Teddy Bridgewater, if they're going to run the ball, take care of business here with Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams, as we expect against the Jaguars, they're not going to put the ball up at all. Vic Fangio does not want to do that. So be careful. I mean, he needs to score a touchdown or stretch the field with a big play. I don't know if the Broncos need to do that this week. So Jamar Chase is the high upside play. We saw just how talented this guy was. If everyone forgot about what he did at LSU, they were quickly reminded in that Bengals opener there against the Vikings. The Bears secondary is not very good. I think there's a perception this is a Bears defense. You can't play them, but they got some back end issues. They gave up a lot of big plays to the Rams last week. So, and Chase made a big play. So I'm going Jamar Chase for the upside. If you're going for full PPR and you need some help there, Jarvis Landry might be a slight lean if you're going for floor, but I always go for ceiling, and Jamar Chase is that ceiling to me.
San Francisco 49ers are going to be taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. The 49ers usually good for their gold mine of running backs, although injury concerns tend to set in at the position. Elijah Mitchell came in last week, had over 100 yards in his debut. Do you think he can do it again this week, or should folks be looking for another running back in that San Francisco backfield?
Yeah, just when you think you're comfortable with Eli Mitchell being the guy, I mean, watch out for Trey Sermon being out there and taking some of the touches. The big explanation was he doesn't play on special teams like the other guys.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they were saving him to use in the backfield. It's going to be the hot hand approach, the dreaded two words we hate to hear when trying to make lineup decisions with the fantasy football backfields. But be careful. It would not shock me at all if Eli Mitchell has like 10 touches and all of a sudden Trey Sermon comes in the game. It also wouldn't shock me if this game goes in the Eagles' favor, where you don't see a lot of 49ers running game. You have to see them put the ball up more in this game. And I think the Eagles look really good against Atlanta. I think this is a good matchup for them. A lot of people out for the 49ers. Javon Kinlaw and that run defense, that's going to be hurting here. Dre Greenlaw, losing him at the second level is a problem. They had Emmanuel Mosley on the shelf, and now Jason Verrett is there. So a lot of stuff for the Eagles to exploit on that 49ers defense here. And their offensive line, by the way, the Eagles, looks like they're back. So I think they'll protect Jalen Hurts, get those big plays. So the game script might not fall in the 49ers' favor, and I'm not sure where they might go then if you got to get a receiver out of the backfield more so than a straight-up zone-blocking runner.
Now, heading into week 2, looking at some of these matchups, you look at some good defensive performances, obviously, from week 1. Who are your absolute do not play these players? You need to sit them this week. What are those matchups, and what teams are they going against?
I mean, I'm going to start Derrick Henry for the Titans, but I'm not feeling a lot of vibes here. I mean, A.J. Brown, we can get him in the lineup, but Julio Jones just doesn't look right. And he didn't get a lot of looks last week. Ryan Tannehill in this offense, if you invested a lot in the Titans offense, I think you're going to be disappointed, overall. I think you look at just a lot of the fundamental issues they're having. The pass protection looked really bad. It looked like Taylor Lewan was a bit shot there. So be wary, maybe forget some of the Titans this week if you're looking to get some guys in your lineup. But the Raiders, I also don't like them in that Steelers matchup. I don't really like a lot in that Bills-Dolphins matchup either. And really the Patriots-Jets matchup, it's pretty low-hanging fruit there with a lot of the offenses. And I think the Jets defense overachieved a little bit last week, so beware of that. I don't expect Mac Jones and this Patriots team to light it up here. They're going to keep it grounded here. So a lot of low-scoring games I expect from AFC East play as well. So not interested in too much in the Bills-Dolphins game outside of Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs in that one. And maybe Devin Singletary because he ran pretty well last week, and he's getting the touches for now in that Bills backfield.
Absolutely. Vinny, we appreciate you being here. Before we get you out of here, one more big one for you, just a must-start for you for folks that are heading into today's matchups.
Well, I'll give you a collective team must-start, and that is the Los Angeles Chargers. This Cowboys defense does not have DeMarcus Lawrence. He's their last best player standing. They're going to have a lot of fun there. Justin Herbert, Jared Cook, get him in the lineup. Mike Williams. We know we're playing Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen. All these guys are going to do major damage. So follow the Cowboys every week because it's going to be good not only for the team that the Cowboys are playing, but the Cowboys themselves because there's going to be a lot of volume for Dak Prescott, kind of like it played out last year early before he went down against the Giants.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Absolutely. Vinny, we appreciate you coming through. For more fantasy football advice on the daily, make sure you're checking out Locked On Fantasy Football, following Vinny on Twitter as well, at Vinny Iyer. Vinny, we appreciate you coming through, bud. We'll be seeing you again next week.
All right, thanks, Ross, Cody. See you next week.
See you, bud.
Boom. He makes some great points there, too, about the Los Angeles Chargers in this matchup. I mean, no Randy Gregory, right? No DeMarcus Lawrence. That's huge. They're moving Micah Parsons from linebacker to defensive end. So Jabril Cox, Leighton Vander Esch, and maybe even Jalen Smith. We'll see a little bit of him at inside backer. You lose your two best pass rushers. I think that's obviously a concern when you're playing an offense like Justin Herbert, who last week against the Washington football team, they looked really good. I mean, we saw Mike Williams having plays. We saw Austin Eckler. We saw Keenan Allen. The usual suspects there for the Chargers. And I feel like our good friends over there, Locked On Chargers, are super excited about this.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think that Dallas, obviously will have enough defensively to kind of stop that offense right there. But then again, this could be a trap game in a sense of, the expectation is that the Cowboys are going to get run out of the stadium, but you never know. But I like that matchup. I think that's a great one for Vinny's focus there, especially in fantasy football. I went 1-0 last week. I'm only in one league, Ross. I don't have time for 4 or 5 leagues like a lot of you guys.
I pared it down a little bit. I'm not going to lie. I had like 5 or 6 last year.
Brutal. I mean, it's hard to just keep up with one. But I did
real.
have Deebo Samuel last week, and I also had Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin. So I was kind of singing my praises there for the fantasy football guys. I was even told that I was the best manager in fantasy football from the app that I use on Sleeper. So
Gotta love it.
We'll see if I can replicate that today, but I have Kirk Cousins as my quarterback right now. I'm not feeling too confident against that Cardinals here today. So we'll see.
Okay, we need to check in with Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings and his Kirk Cousins chaos meter to see how it's looking for you. Speaking of that Chargers and Cowboys game, we both got the Chargers winning that one. I'm completely in lockstep with you on that. Chargers defense as well, I think, in a much better place than especially the secondary, in a much better place than what you saw from that Dallas defense. For the Los Angeles Rams going up against the Indianapolis Colts, both of us agree here that it's the Los Angeles Rams all the way. How fun were they to watch in prime time week 1?
Oh, man, Matthew Stafford, Sean McVay, a match made in heaven. That's one where Sean McVay was swiping right before, it even got sent. But, I think for the LA Rams, it's kind of this pick your poison. And what we saw from Matthew Stafford in this offense, in comparison, there was somebody on Twitter, I forgot who it was, I'd give them credit, but they actually posted some of the similar plays that the Rams ran. They had one with Matthew Stafford running and executing the play. Then they had one with Jared Goff, who absolutely didn't execute that play when he was a Ram. So I think that he gives them just a little bit more aptitude at that position, but he looks good in LA, Ross. And, I think that for that division and obviously for the defense, you kind of have to kind of grin a little bit because I feel like this is a big year. Cooper Kupp, obviously one of those players you have to keep an eye on. Van Jefferson getting into the action last week. I liked what I saw from the Rams. Like for me, if I was a fan of a team, I'd be like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna one of those fans that has like two teams, like one in the AFC, one in the NFC. If you're one of those fans, I'd tell fans, hey, make sure it's an NFC team. Make sure it's the Rams this year. They look fun to watch. But then again, can Sean McVay be consistent? Because that's been another question similar to Cliff Kingsbury. Obviously, those guys are buddies. But yeah, kind of the similar storylines for them. But Matthew Stafford, I think, is in a great place.
Yeah, absolutely. You saw how happy Sean McVay was on the sideline after the first touchdown there. He was like, finally, my offense. So I'm all about Matt Stafford and those Los Angeles Rams. I think they might be challenging for the best team in the NFC this season. Let's continue moving ahead here as we get close to wrapping up today's episode. Las Vegas Raiders, Pittsburgh Steelers, a very fun matchup in Vegas for this one as they opened up this season. What a crazy ending, but you're going to need that luck for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Did the Las Vegas Raiders already use up the luck that they need for this matchup?
Well, when I made this pick, this was before Josh Jacobs was ruled out with everything as his injury designation. I don't know. I think a lot of it is going to be dependent upon, I think that this is a Raiders team offensively. They're so explosive. They can score at any point. They beat a very good Ravens defense that, look, I mean, when you go cover 0 and you're on the field a lot against a team that goes 4 receivers to one side out of a bunch stack formation, it's going to be hard to get stops. And so I think that for me, that was kind of my thought process on picking the Raiders. I'm a little skeptical of that now. However, a lot of it is going to be contingent upon what does Big Ben look like for the Raiders here today. Max Crosby, Yannick Ngakoue, those two guys coming off of a very good game where obviously Max Crosby won AFC Defensive Player of the Week recognition for the National
And
Football League.
deservedly so.
You like to see that, obviously, with his story and where things are at there. But, man, what a game. Can we go back to that game for a moment? I know we got the Monday Night Football game between the Packers and the Lions. We get the Manning cast, my friend. And I tell
that
you
was
what,
so much fun.
that is the best thing that ESPN has ever done, in my opinion. Now, I think they did an absolutely terrible job of promoting it because most of us found out on Twitter that it was ongoing. But, man, I tell you what, you get to see Peyton's mind work. Eli's funny, man, but, I think people are tuning in to really watch Peyton, the way that he reacts to things going on. The thing that stood out to me the most was the first play. Eli goes, okay, hey, first play of the season for the Raiders. This is going to determine what their record is. What do you got? Derek Carr throws a pass to the right side. The wide receiver drops. He goes, oh, they're going to go 6-11 now. I love it. So give me the Manning cast all week, every week. I will tune in. There's nothing better on TV.
Absolutely. I think they need to pick them up a little bit more. They have 10 games this season. Give them every week. Give them every week and find a way to get them involved in the playoffs too. A couple of games that we are in agreement on here. Houston Texans, Cleveland Browns. We both took Cleveland after Houston opens with a win against Jacksonville. And then we took San Francisco over Philly. We talked a bit about San Francisco and Philly already. So let's focus on Houston at Cleveland. Cleveland Browns at home. Baker Mayfield, one of 3 quarterbacks to he had a rough go week 1. One of 3 quarterbacks with his stat line there, an interception, no touchdowns, all that good stuff. Do you see the Cleveland Browns bouncing back against the Houston Texans here?
I do. No OBJ in this matchup. The Houston Texans surprised us all, but they played the Jacksonville Jaguars, right? But I was really impressed by seeing Tyrod Taylor. He looked good. Mark Ingram, Philip Lindsay looked good. However, they're going against a Cleveland Browns defense that, in my opinion, that first half against Kansas City did a really good job eliminating those big plays. But it's a war of attrition, and against a team like Kansas City who could put up points at any given moment, it kind of wore on them late in that game. But, man, what a game we were treated to between those two to open up the season. Cleveland rebounds in a big way here against the Houston Texans. Yeah,
big time opportunity for them coming back and being able to get that bounce back. We get a couple of divisional matchups on today's slate as well. New England Patriots, New York Jets. New York Jets opening up the season with a disappointing loss there to the Carolina Panthers. New England, same with the Miami Dolphins. Then you get the Atlanta Falcons, who got absolutely blown out by Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles, which, by the way, I don't think we talk about Jalen Hurts enough. Maybe we should bring the Locked On Eagles guys on next week to make sure that we get some real coverage on Jalen Hurts, who has really... I think Nick Sirianni's done a very good job over there building an offense around Jalen Hurts. Now, it's only 1 week. We'll see how it continues to go. But Atlanta, the road doesn't get any easier. They get blown out week 1. Now they go up against the Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Looking like a little bit of 0-2 start for Aaron Freeman and Locked On Falcons today.
Yeah, if you've got anybody on the Falcons on your fantasy team, don't start them this week. Maybe outside of Calvin Ridley or even Kyle Pitts, just because of the fact that the secondary there for Tampa Bay is all banged up. But, they're not going to have anybody. Mike Davis, I would not start him. You're not going to have success against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. Now, for Tampa Bay, they are well rested. Obviously, opened up the season 2 weeks ago on Thursday Night Football. This is their first game since then. And I tell you what, if Atlanta looks the way that they did last week, this is going to be ugly, Ross. I mean, we might see 50 burner in this one. Keep an eye on that, especially with how the offense for Tampa Bay has looked. And not to mention, I've got Antonio Brown. I got Chris Godwin in my lineup. We saw both those guys go off for over 100 yards in their debut against the Dallas Cowboys. Against this secondary here in Atlanta, I tell you what, give me that money.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, I got to tell you, the only thing I love almost as much as the Saints winning or the Falcons losing. So I'm looking forward to today. We talked about Minnesota, Arizona, Dallas, and the Chargers. We got Tennessee trying to get a bounce back game here, but it's not going to be easy. They're traveling to Seattle to get it done. Russell Wilson completing the longest air yards pass of week 1, 59.4 yards, an incredible offense. The changes on that offense, all in favor of Russell Wilson and the deep ball. They were a lot of fun to watch week 1. Do you expect to see more of the same here in week 2?
I do.
Yeah.
I had Tyler Lockett on my fantasy team as well last week. I just think that right now, I think we're going to see a regression from Tennessee. I think obviously Downing, who was the tight end coach under Arthur Smith. They promoted him to offensive coordinator, but I said it this week in our preview show, the buildup and the way that these two guys each call offensive plays or call a game, it's completely different in terms of game flow and understanding. That's where Arthur Smith has that advantage. Now, obviously, it doesn't look that way in Atlanta right now, but, for a team that was predominantly play action last year, I was surprised with how less of play action we saw from Ryan Tannehill and the Titans last week. We saw a lot of shotgun, and then the one play they tried doing play action, guess what? Chandler Jones in Ryan Tannehill's face right away. And look, they stopped the run against Derrick Henry, and Julio Jones has not done a really good job so far. So we'll see how things go, for this matchup. I just don't think that they're going to beat Seattle. I think Seattle has too much offensive firepower, and I don't know. I mean, maybe they get in rhythm offensively. Tennessee does, but I just don't see them keeping pace here with Seattle and Russell Wilson, who was also great on that Manning cast, by the way, on Monday. We should keep him on too.
I was glad that they ended up extending him through the end of the game, because he was only supposed to be there for a little bit of the fourth quarter, and he was like, nah, it's fine. Kids are in bed. Sierra's at the Met. I'm watching tape. I'll be up all night. Let's get it. So he had himself a great time, and he was a lot of fun to watch as well with those guys. Completely agree. Last games for, they got the Sunday night game, which is going to be a big matchup between two AFC usual powerhouses. Yes, the Baltimore Ravens started off the season with a loss, but now they're heading to take on the Kansas City Chiefs. I think this is going to be a fun matchup to watch. You get Patrick Mahomes, you get Lamar Jackson, you get everything that you need when it comes to the NFL. This is an NFL fan, a football fan's game. What are you looking forward to in this matchup?
Well, Ronnie Stanley, a lot of questions about his health heading into this matchup at the tackle position. Obviously, he suffered a season-ending or, a playoff-ending injury last year for the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson had 3 fumbles last week. 2 of them, they were lost fumbles. I worry about ball security here. Got to be able to pass. I don't think this is a close game, Ross. I think the Chiefs are going to blow the brakes off of the Ravens in this matchup. Primetime decimation.
Oh, I think the thing that's going to be so interesting to watch here for me is going to be the offensive line for the Kansas City Chiefs. Can the offensive line for Kansas City keep Patrick Mahomes as clean as possible? Now, thankfully, you've got Patrick Mahomes, who plays well off script, does a lot of things out of structure, can get outside the pocket and extend plays. Of course, he can do all of that. But it's really tough when both of your tackles melt down at the same time as one of your interior offensive linemen, and you get sandwiched between 2 defensive linemen, like we saw Patrick Mahomes have to deal with last week. So ideally, you're able to keep Patrick Mahomes clean. If you can do that even to an adequate extent, I'm not even talking about excellent offensive line play, then I completely agree with you. It's going to be really tough for this Baltimore Ravens offense to keep pace with the high-powered offense of the Kansas City Chiefs. Over the last 25 games, we haven't seen Lamar Jackson throw for over 225 yards. You have to be able to pass in this league, especially if you're trying to keep up with the Kansas City Chiefs. And speaking of trying to keep up, I think that's maybe the best that the Detroit Lions can ask for on Monday night, as they're going to be going up against an Aaron Rodgers and Green Bay Packers that I'm sure are going to be very angry following the 38-3 loss that opened up their season. What do you expect to see here between these two division rivals to wrap up the week?
I expect Detroit to be chippy and to keep fighting, though. But look, what Green Bay team are we going to see? Are the real Green Bay Packers going to stand up this week? I was surprised. I probably as surprised as you were last week, Ross, the performance we saw from Rodgers and Green Bay. And Rodgers, my man, he needs to invest in a haircut, shave up the beard. He's looking raggedy. He's looking like Matthew McConaughey in mud, my friend.
All right.
We got to figure something out here with the Packers. They're too talented to look the way that they did. Now, granted, they were going up against a great defense last week. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to have some fun. I'm looking forward to hearing what Peyton Manning has to say about Aaron Rodgers in this one, because the mind of these two quarterbacks together, seeing how maybe Peyton breaks it down is going to be fun. But man, prime time for Dan Campbell. Can he get something going? Obviously, he's the guy that you want to bite kneecaps and claw along the way. Well, they did that last week against San Francisco, and they had no business really being in that game, but they fought back. I was impressed by that. Looking forward to seeing Rodgers. Not so much Jared Goff.
Yeah, Jared Goff, look, it's going to be tough, but hopefully this Detroit Lions team can continue to build an offense around the next quarterback in the what we'll call the post-Goff era, going in or going out of that time. I do think that the Detroit Lions, because they play a lot of too high when it comes to their defensive scheme, and they play a lot of cover 2, they play a lot of cover 4. So you see a lot of the middle of the field open situations over on their defensive side and schematics on the defensive side, which tend to give Aaron Rodgers a little bit of trouble. Certainly we saw him struggle against a cover 2 heavy scheme when it came to the New Orleans Saints, who did mix in some cover 3, mix in some middle of the field close looks. So the Detroit Lions will have to do that as well. But they have the personnel to create a little bit of, let's just say, adversity for Aaron Rodgers. But is it going to be enough and sustainable over 60 minutes? That part I don't know. And are they going to be able to limit Aaron Jones, who traditionally has a lot of success not only against Detroit, but, well, I guess I would say against Detroit, but also in Detroit as well, which isn't entirely relevant here. But he does have these really nice games against Detroit. So I think that that's going to be sort of the next big part of it. And what's the health and the, let's say, familiarity of the offensive line, who's still working through some young players on that offensive line for Green Bay? Can they continue to pave the way for Aaron Jones against this Detroit Lions defense? Cody, that's every game, every team. It's what we do here on Locked On NFL Sunday. No fluff, no time for it, just football. How are you feeling about today's matchups? What are you most excited about?
I'm excited just for week 2, man. Here we are, week 2, and just seeing the stadiums full again. It just brings me joy. It gives me a little bit of energy. I'm sitting there on my couch, and I'm literally, Ross, I don't know if it's just a former football player in me or the coach, but I'm sitting there, at my couch. My hands are on my knees. I'm leaning forward. I'm just intently focused on what's going on. Obviously, the Broncos play the early game, so I'm going to do my coverage on that. But I'm looking forward to watching that, doing the post-game recap on Locked On Broncos, but also watching the afternoon games, watching Sunday night, and then obviously the Manicast tomorrow. Week 2 football. We have, Ross, after this week, we have 15 more weeks of regular season football, and then we have an additional added 4 weeks for the postseason. I mean, this is the best time of the year, and you get all the action here at the Locked On Podcast Network. We have a team representative, local experts covering the team that you root for, so make sure you check it out. Locked On, whatever your team name is that you root for on Sundays, we have you covered, not to mention a college football network, college network in general. College football is very big right now, obviously, with that being in season. NBA, MLB, NHL, we have everything on the Locked On Podcast Network.
Absolutely. Cody, always a pleasure, my friend, to continue to follow along with what Cody's got going on today and every day. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL. Check out Locked On Broncos with him and his fantastic co-host Sarah over there as well. And of course, you can come and check out Locked On Saints at wherever it is that you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson-Nola. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On NFL YouTube page so you get all of the NFL video content that you're looking for. We'll be back next Sunday morning here on Locked On NFL Sunday, part of Locked On Podcast Network.